Good morning and welcome to Behind the Screen. I am JM, and this is a show where we hang out, we talk about games, card games, board games, role playing games, but especially role playing games, and especially things that are beautiful, things that inspire us. And as I've always said, Dostoevsky says beauty will save the world. And I like to talk about things on this show that I find personally beautiful, things that inspire me. And I am very, very excited to have a special guest on the show today because, well, we'll get into that. But before we jump over to the guest, let me say hello to John and Grom and Knights of the Smith Dinner Table and Citizen Armistice. I don't think I forgot anybody else, but let's just get into it. Today, I have a very special guest. I have Tracy Sizemore here to talk about the Han cluster. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me, Jam. It's a pleasure to be here as always.
I am so glad I've gotten to talk with you. I've gotten to talk with you a lot since we met in person at Gamehole Con like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we were there for Savage Worlds, and obviously we both work on Savage Worlds material together. And I have been a big fan of the Han Cluster for a while, and you were very gracious to let me run a blind play test of it. So, for people who may not know, tell us about this optimistic sci-fi setting that's currently live on BackerKit right now. I am sharing the link in the chat.
Awesome. So yeah, Han Cluster is what I call an optimistic or hopeful sci-fi setting for Savage Worlds. And I think I need to clarify what the optimism means because a lot of people ask, like, how does that work? Like, I think that a lot of people think maybe there's nothing to do, right?
Yeah.
And really, what I think of when I think of optimistic is how the world perceives how we handle the problems or how we perceive the problems that we try to overcome.
Yeah.
It's a sense of we can overcome no matter how bad it gets.
Yeah.
And also that the world starts out in game as a pleasant place to live for the most part, right? There are other planets that have less privilege than others, like Edenic is post-scarcity economy and it's a
Yeah.
beautiful place to live and all that. And Venin is a very much resource-heavy sort of exploited planet in that way. And there
Yeah.
are people that live there, and it's not like horrible, but it's not great either. So there's variance of what's happening here, but in general, the world the universe or the Han cluster plus Earth that we start with is a pleasant place to be, and we have to establish that
Mm-hmm.
because there's an existential threat that is threatening all of humanity through the next, which is a sort of adjacent dimension to
Yeah.
reality. There's transhuman abilities associated with it, where you can sort of separate your semi-corporeal ex-ghosts and do stuff. But the idea is that this threat, the blinding, is happening. It is active. It is sort of like 50 Fathoms, where it's drowning the world.
Yeah.
And it's coming and it's going to ruin the world. It's going to ruin humanity unless you do something about it. And when you see how good we have it at the very beginning of the game and see how things progress
Yeah.
into horror basically near the end of the game, that I think is what is part of that optimistic, hope-filled setting, is that we want to restore, we want to bring back or keep, preserve what we had in dealing with this threat. And the whole attitude that the game has, that the people in game have, that the PCs
Yeah.
have, is we can accomplish this no matter how bad it
Yeah.
gets. We can move on, even if the worst happens. So there's plenty of threats, and there's plenty to do. And
Mm-hmm.
yet there's also a underlying sort of thread of connection, working together with others. There's a whole raft of NPCs that you will be introduced to, especially in the plot point campaign, and they don't take over, but they are important, and hopefully they will, worm their way into your hearts in one way or another. That's the idea. And I've made not only the NPCs in the book, but also cards for them, because at some
Yeah.
point you might actually be able to step into their shoes for a little while and contribute to their contributions to this threat and how they help.
So I love that aspect of the game. My playtest didn't touch on that because again,
Hmm.
we were focused on it. But I loved the idea of, hey, these NPCs are important. They're not just so important to the story, but they need to be important to the characters and the
Yes.
players. And by giving the players the opportunity to step into the shoes of the NPCs, you really allow them to forge a connection. That's
Yes.
something that I've done in World of Darkness games before, where I would just hand off new NPCs to players and be like, all right, well, if you're not in the scene, you're playing, just in
Right.
case the lawyer. But going back to the optimistic, so I love that. I don't think I've actually expressed that to you. I love that mechanic and that narrative control that you kind of give up and allow the players to experience.
Hmm.
So I love optimistic stories. And
Hmm.
I mean, John Doom or Grom brought up Knights of the Smith Dinner Table, DM James, yeah. Original Star Trek. Original Star
Hmm.
Trek was a very hopeful. The idea that, and even Next Generation, the idea that our better angels could prevail. Uh,
Hmm.
like I love Deep Space Nine, but I really put the blame of current Star Trek on Deep Space Nine because they were the first ones who were like, "Ooh, but what if it isn't perfect? But
Let's have a
what
Dominion war.
yeah. Well, the Dominion War, but also like what was it, Section 31 or
Oh
Section
yeah, they
13?
that
Like,
was sort of introduced. Yeah.
yeah, and you're just kind of like, like my favorite
Yeah.
episode of Deep Space Nine is also the most morally gray one, where Cisco basically is narrating his log about how they got the Romulans brought into the Dominion War, and it turns out that their own side blew up a Romulan ship and blamed it on the Dominion. And he deletes the log, and I remember loving it and getting to the end of it and being like, "Oh, but this doesn't feel like Star Trek to
I
me."
feel a little dirty.
Yeah, but also, you talk about how dark and evil it gets, and one of my favorite series, and I talk about it a lot on Behind the Screen, is the Malazan Books of the Fallen. It's a military fantasy series
Mm.
about soldiers in the trenches for an empire, and yet the whole theme of the series is compassion is the defining trait that makes humans human. And
Yeah.
so I love that in the midst of a very violent and dark series, that is the thread that the authors keep coming back to and keep hammering. And I love that about the Han Cluster because
Yeah.
compassion and connection is really what makes, I want to say human, but also linked machine, right? Like
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Linked beings is
linked
what I call
beings.
them
Yeah.
collectively.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's what makes it worth fighting for, you
Yeah.
know? And then there's if you do well, like my players did, and Tink and John and James are in here, you
And
may
they
earn a
barely made it, right?
yeah. Well, I mean, but they barely made it, but they succeeded so well at that dramatic task that they had that moment of almost perfect clarity where you got to see how everything connects.
Hmm.
I don't know if you're a comic book fan, Tracy.
I am.
Have you read All Star Superman?
I have not.
It's
I
my
have not.
absolute favorite Superman story. It's also available as a animated movie.
Hmm.
But I'm going to spoil a little bit. Spoilers for All Star Superman. It's been out for several decades. Um, Lex Luthor at the end of it steals Superman's powers, and by the end of the issue, he gives up because he sees things the way Superman sees them, and basically sees how everyone is connected, and is like, you see this every day. This is why
Mm.
you are who you are. I'm like,
Yeah.
yes,
Awesome.
yes. So yeah,
Awesome.
All Star Superman is. Grom just picked up the new $10 compilation of All Star Superman. It is a great deal. Like you can get them in little digest size, and it's
Hmm.
$10. If you get it, Tracy, I think you would love it. It's spectacular.
Cool.
But let's talk
That
about Han
sounds awesome.
Cluster.
Right,
Uh,
right. Yeah, the part of the like there's a couple of tenets in the Han cluster as far as creating adventures,
mhm.
right? Or at least my suggestions.
Yeah.
You can do whatever you want, of course. And Han cluster lends itself to horror in a way that space is still real And
Mm-hmm.
even if you have the X-bonds and all those connection things that we've talked about in other streams,
Yeah.
those things can suddenly disappear. They can go away. There are mechanics for that,
Yeah.
especially to do with the blinding. There are things out there, and I don't want to spoil it because I think it's pretty
Oh, I
cool,
agree.
but that can disrupt these things,
It
and
is
all of
an
a sudden you're
existential
alone.
threat. And so if you're not familiar with that term, that's a term that really gets kicked around a lot in science fiction, which is it is a threat to the whole of humanity. Like
Yes.
it is a threat that if it is not dealt with, humanity is over. Even though we've spanned two systems, this existential threat is just done.
Yeah. Well, worst case, you may have a few survivors,
Right.
right?
But humanity is
And
no longer a
it's not what it
viable, yeah.
was. Yeah.
Well,
You're at that point you have so few that you're not sure you've got a viable pool
right.
to
Yeah, what is it?
to make more.
Yeah, the minimum viable population, MP, no,
I don't
MVP.
remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
minimum viable population, which is the minimum number of people that you need to have, or beings that you need to have to ensure that there's enough genetic diversity that you're not
Yes,
just
to
collapsing.
propagate the species.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But all right, so first of all, again, congratulations. You blew past your initial funding. You're at like
Yes.
300%, and you've still got
Yes.
2 weeks left to go. I'm going to put the link in the chat right before we let off. It is in the show notes. But one
Awesome.
thing I really want to talk about is this idea of X-Bond.
Hmm.
Because yes, the setting is very unique, and the mechanics are great. And I mean, go watch our Savage Universe where I talk, I just gush about like the final battle and the auction and the shock barge and all of these things. But I think what truly sets the Han cluster apart from other sci-fi settings that either you could go out and get for Savage Worlds or you could build yourself with the sci-fi companion. Obviously, it's the plot point campaign, which we
Hmm.
don't have time to go into today. But I need to tell you, it is an emotional roller coaster. It is the plot point campaign is the heart of the Han cluster for me. The setting book is here's all the window dressing to get you to the point that you can play through the plot point campaign.
Right. I mean, you can do stuff. There's an
Oh
adventure
yeah,
generator, and there's hopefully hooks and organizations that you can
there's a
engage with, and
lot.
all that
Yeah,
stuff.
a hundred,
But
a
I
hundred
put
percent.
all the adventures in a single
Yes,
book because I had so many.
and
You
well,
know.
and you have all the savage tales as well,
Yep.
and the crisis events.
Yep.
But let's talk about X bonds because that's truly for me the mechanic that um, really sets the Han cluster apart from,
Yeah.
uh, I would say most other RPGs. So in most
Yes.
other RPGs, the tenet is don't split the party,
Yeah.
right?
Or at least that's traditional,
Right.
right? The D&D sort of, yeah.
When I
But
run large games, because I'll run games for 13, 14. I run a Savage Worlds game at my son's school for as many as like 16 or 17 kids. They know
wow.
the rule is the smaller party is never heard from again. It's just like I can't do it. But tell us about X bonds and why in Han Cluster you are actively encouraged to split the party.
Yeah, yeah. At some point, at certain points, you not only are encouraged, but you must split the party.
Yeah.
And so X bonds, they do two or three major things. One is you become X bonded together, which means through the next you have some sort of bond, and nobody exactly knows why or how this happens. Usually it's to do with some deep emotional event or some crisis event that you've gone through together, usually, but no one really has been
Hmm.
able to forcibly create an X bond
They've
by
they've
trying
tried.
to do. They tried.
Oh,
There's a
yeah.
savage tale
Yeah.
about it, and it's
Speaking of
pretty awful.
horror, yeah.
It's pretty awful. But yeah, so once that happens, and it can be among two people, but really rarely it can happen among groups, and that's what the PCs are. The PCs are all exponded together, all of them. And the first thing is that they can communicate mentally over any distance, between any obstacle.
Hmm.
So it's basically telepathic communication. They can't share like images and stuff, but they basically just talk.
Yeah.
right? And that's the first thing. The second thing is because they can detach their X ghosts, everybody in human space can do it. Every linked beings can move their X ghost away from their body. Their X ghost is now semi-corporeal. They leave their sleeper behind who falls asleep. And it's basically an apparition type thing, an astral projection type thing,
Mm-hmm.
except they're semi-corporeal. So they can't walk through walls, they can't fly. They're not actually ghosts. But when they're X bonded, you can teleport that X ghost to an X bonded mate, no matter where they are, no matter the obstacles between them. And because they're semi corporeal, they can still do stuff. Besides interact with physical things, which they have interaction penalties for
Mm-hmm.
because they're slippery and
Yeah.
not quite all there. There's this gear, there's a whole new set of gear called X gear, and that has to do with the Draxel communication systems, the Draxel that was created by Karina Lutz, and everybody carries this little wafer of a sort of chip that allows them to focus their connection to the next through this lens, this wafer of a sort of a green lens that allows them to have X gear. And so you can have weapons that are
Mm-hmm.
manifest in the next. You can have data pads that are next based. You can have hair ties that are next based. You can have clothing that's next based. So that is all happening through your Draxel.
Mm-hmm.
And that travels with you when you ghost travel
Mm-hmm.
to another ex-bonded mate. So not only do you have yourself there that you can talk and interact in the physical world with a penalty with ghostless objects, but you have a whole, slew of X gear that goes with you. So your weapons travel with you. Your clothes travel with you when you do that.
Yeah.
Nothing physical travels with you, which is really important because it still requires you. If you need to go get a physical thing, you actually need to go and get that physical thing. You
Mm-hmm.
need to physically go and get it. You can't just X ghost there and pick it up and then come back and snap back to your body. You have to go get it. So that's you feel like on the surface from the outside it can look like X bonding and this powerful connection between these people can break the game, but it actually doesn't break the game,
Yeah.
and it actually opens up lots of possibilities for crazy adventures that you can have being able to do this. One of those is demonstrated with reunification, the jumpstart.
Yeah.
And then the other is the plot point campaign, especially near the end,
Especially near
where
the end.
you're forced to do it.
So I've got to say it without spoiling a whole lot.
Hmm.
In that final fight,
Yeah.
uh, one of the players used this mechanic to instantly teleport 3,000 light years to the other
Yes.
group
Yep.
and cast a large blast template entangle to save the other group so that they could deal
Yeah.
with these threats, and then went back to her body. Well done,
Yeah.
Tank. Knights of the Smith dinner table really wants to animate that final battle map in Arkin
Awesome.
Forge. Yeah, I think that would be. Which, by the way, just thanks to GM James, I'm putting together a little map show off. I get to show off Arkin Forge on the stream, hopefully this month. I'm building a little map showing off all the fun things that it can do. He's going to give me
Cool.
another tutorial on like using it as a live battle map, but
Mhm.
Arkin Forge, if you need map, that's coming. We're going to talk about Arkin Forge this month. I'm very excited. Tink's in the chat and she's like, "It was me." Yeah, it was you. It was
Yay.
a great mechanic. You did it. Yeah,
Congratulations, and thank you for doing that. And that's the whole point. That's the whole point.
yeah. DM James says they will deliver a copy of the animated battle map to you, Tracy, when they finish it up.
Awesome. I mean, I love that map. Jason Judah did it,
Yeah,
and it is fantastic. I mean, I'm with maps, I sketch them out because I want specific things, and then I let the artist sort of go to town with how it looks and adding little elements and stuff like
it's a
that.
beautiful map, and I gotta say, for the final fight, it did everything that you, as the designer, wanted it to. Like,
Yeah.
you essentially have two groups split up over 3,000 light years, and yet everybody gets to play on the same battle map.
Yeah.
We use the same initiative round. Like it was it. it went so smooth. Just well done. Like from a design standpoint, that was very well executed.
Awesome. I did like tests of my own for it because at first, because I do a modified dramatic task for it that
Hmm.
also sort of it reinforces that sense of you can only do this together.
Hmm.
And I tested that, and I killed several PC parties during my own testing before I test it with other people.
Yeah.
I'm on my kitchen table. I've got my little drawn map out there, and I'm doing the fight. And I'm like, yeah, they could win, but more often than not, they're just gonna get their butts kicked.
It
And I
was.
finally altered some stuff and then got it just right, and then tested it with other people to confirm it.
Yeah. Well, Tracy, anything else you would like to add? I'm going to put the link in the chat. Thank you so much for coming on behind the screen to talk about it. I have been an enthusiastic supporter of Han Cluster since we first talked about it, and
Yeah.
I'm so excited to see it on BackerKit.
No, just spread the word. The backer kit is live now. This
Hmm.
is the time. It really helps me. The more we can get now, the better off I will be. As it is a true Kickstarter. So making that funding and getting that going helps me launch the product in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
So if we can get that word spread and all that, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. You've unlocked 10 stretch goals. You've got an 11th here, and you and I were talking about there are more stretch
There are
goals to
more
come.
coming. Yeah, there's a couple more. Assuming we get it, we get past certain things. I've got a couple more physical ones that will be useful for everybody and almost everybody, depending on what tiers you got. And then some more digital ones. I want to write some music for the Hun cluster, but I have to give above a certain level before I start putting pressure on myself to do that. So we'll see. We'll see what we can unlock.
Well, two last things. One, uh, Citizen Armistice is running reunification 2 weekends at a local convention.
Awesome.
John Doom
He's
wants to
run it
know
before.
what question should we ask that we may not have asked about the Han cluster?
I think it's fair to wonder about some of the mysteries and like what are some of the mysteries? And
Yeah.
I think what I would say is I'm not going to answer them, but there are mysteries about the origin of linked machines.
Mm-hmm.
There's an answer to that mystery in the book. The PCs may or may not figure it out, and it just depends on how things
Yeah.
go. There's mysteries about why X bonding and the Draxler communication system can go down. There's a enemy out there that is very hard to detect, and the PCs may or may not see it.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just those, and what is the nature of the next?
Mm-hmm.
What is beyond? What happened? Why is the plot point campaign called Transcendence?
Yeah.
These are these questions that are worth asking as PCs as you go through the campaign to see if you can convince your GM to reveal some of them.
Awesome. Uh, DM James, I think I'll ask the question, but I think we all know the answer is yes. Was making Eden a nudist society intended to allow John Doom to play an entire campaign with his character naked?
It was not actually. However, I have a friend who's a nudist, and they were interested in trying to in wanting a planet that had a climate that was conducive to it,
Yeah.
so that it was plausible that a large majority of the people on the planet might go to nudism,
Yeah.
right? And I was like, oh, all for it. And I'm not a nudist, but I think it's a cool idea,
Yeah.
and it's a neat idea for a civilization trait.
Yeah.
So you don't have to engage with it, but the Han cluster is sex positive, and it's also, it tries to move beyond some of those social hangups that we've had, right? That's all. That I just wanted it doesn't go into it,
No,
but it does touch on it.
I'm with Tink. We all kept forgetting that he was naked, and then getting
Yes.
reminded in the middle of like a.
And that's perfect, right? Like
That was his favorite
that's
part.
the idea. Eventually you will forget. Eventually you will just accept them for who they are, and that's the way it is, right?
Well, Tracy, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be had. Thank you very much,
Oh, it's
Jam.
my pleasure. We'll be back next week on Tuesday to talk about, I don't know, something. I haven't planned out that far, but we're only going to have for the next 2 weeks. We're only going to do Tuesday shows because I'm going to Chaosium Con next week, and then we're going. I don't know when I'm leaving for my Easter trip, but until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay gaming. Go out there and back the Han cluster. Let people know. You got the link in the chat. Let people know about it. It is totally a worthy and beautiful thing to invest in. I will see you all on Tuesday. This has been Behind the Screen. Until next time, everybody, have a good one.